On Thursday the 23rd of June in 2022, a 15-year-old high school student named Joniah Walker was caught on a security camera walking away from her home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when she would mysteriously disappear. That day, Joniah's father was supposed to be picking her up, as he had planned to get her a worker's permit to allow the teenager to continue working at a local restaurant called Pizza Shuttle. However, after realizing that she wasn't home, the family would quickly decide to report her missing to the Milwaukee PD as they began to fear the worst. But strangely, despite their desperate pleas for help, the police initially refused to act and rather callously labelled Joniah as a runaway, leaving the family with no other option but to take the case into their own hands. So, after checking security cameras in the local area, it was soon discovered that Joniah had in fact left on her own accord, as she was spotted walking away from her home carrying a large rucksack, but a search of the deleted files on her iPad would also reveal that she was planning to meet an unidentified person that day, which only further escalated the danger surrounding her disappearance. However, there would still be one more twist to the tale, as just a few weeks after going missing, her mother would receive an email from somebody claiming to be Joniah, but the email address was quickly deleted, meaning it could not be tracked. So, given the lack of concrete evidence and unwillingness from the police to investigate, for almost 2 years the case remains unsolved, with some people believing she will never be found. But in recent weeks, it would seem that Joniah's case is finding itself back in the headlines, due to the recent murder of fellow Pizza Shuttle employee Sade Robinson, as the eerily similar details in their stories has led many to wonder, could these cases be connected by the same suspect? And if not, what really happened to Joniah Walker? Joniah Alexis Walker was born in 2008 to her loving mother Tanisha Howard in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she enjoyed a happy childhood alongside her close-knit family. Not too much more is known about her younger years, but what we do know is that Joniah was, by all accounts, an incredibly caring person, with her mother Tanisha also describing her as shy and intelligent, but at the same time very outgoing when she was around her family. However, this rather positive personality would eventually take an extremely negative turn, when Joniah suffered a life-changing incident at the age of 11, leaving her with severe depression and PTSD due to the dark nature of the event. In response, her family would go on to do everything they could to try and help Joniah, such as setting her up with a therapist, which she would meet with once a week. But despite their massive efforts to try and put the broken pieces back together, Joniah would continue to deal with her trauma as the years went by, with the teenager finding it difficult to move on as she continuously suffered with dangerously dark thoughts. However, refusing to give up on herself, Joniah was determined to move on from the incident that had haunted her childhood for so long. So, after speaking with her family, the decision was made that she would begin working for a local pizza restaurant named Pizza Shuttle. And after proving herself during the initial trial period, Joniah would be welcomed on board the team. But in order to officially start working at the restaurant, she was notified that she would first need to get a worker's permit from the state, as in Milwaukee, this is a necessary requirement to allow 15-year-olds to work. So, given the situation, her father had planned to take her during the summer of 2022, with the hopes that she would be able to spend her school holidays doing something productive. However, these plans would unfortunately never come to fruition, as on that fateful day in June, Joniah Walker would mysteriously disappear, never to be seen again. On Thursday the 23rd of June, the high school student was spending the day at home as she was enjoying the freedom of the school holidays while her mother Tanisha was at work, checking in from time to time. But at some point during the day, Tanisha would receive a strange phone call from her teenage daughter, who would go on to ask some obscure questions about an unknown package that had been delivered to the house. But given that there were no deliveries scheduled for that day, Tanisha was left confused by her line of questioning and assured Joniah that she must have been making a mistake. So, reasonably satisfied, Joniah accepted her mother's explanation, and the pair ended the phone call shortly after, with Tanisha reminding her that her father would be picking her up soon to sort out the worker's permit for her job at Pizza Shuttle. However, despite these plans, it would appear that Joniah had alternative ideas, as when her father would arrive outside the apartment to pick her up, she would fail to answer the door, and after trying to get in touch with her cell phone, it was quickly realised that she was ignoring his calls. So, concerned by Joniah's behaviour, her father then called up Tanisha to inform her about the situation and to see if she perhaps knew where Joniah could be. But to his surprise, Tanisha was also completely in the dark as to why their teenage daughter was not answering the door, and after making her own unsuccessful attempt to contact Joniah over the phone, it was immediately established that something was seriously wrong. Tanisha then rushed home from work to see if her daughter was perhaps just asleep or listening to music with her headphones too loud, as it was not normal behaviour for Joniah to ignore her parents, especially if they had made important plans. But to her devastation, after arriving home and searching the apartment top to bottom, Tanisha eventually accepted that her daughter was not there, so with nowhere else to turn, she then decided to drive down to the Milwaukee Police Department to officially report her 15-year-old daughter as missing. However, despite the incredibly dangerous situation that was unfolding before their eyes, the officers simply responded by stating that Joniah was likely just a runaway and that there was nothing they could do, leaving Tanisha with no other choice but to take the case into her own hands. On Friday the 24th of June, Tanisha Howard, alongside the rest of the family, would begin searching the local neighbourhood for any signs of the missing teenager, with plans to check surveillance cameras that may have picked up Joniah's movements on the previous day. So instinctively, the first place Tanisha thought to check was the local security cameras outside the apartment complex, as they would have surely picked up the time that Joniah had left their home. And sure enough, after talking to the property manager and asking to see the surveillance video footage, Tanisha was heartbroken to see her 15-year-old daughter leaving the apartment complex alone, with a big rucksack implying that she was in fact choosing to run away. However, refusing to allow Joniah to walk the streets alone, Tanisha was determined to get her daughter home as soon as possible, and knew the best course of action would be to try speaking to the police again, to see if there was anything they could do with the security footage. But once again, Tanisha was met with a brick wall, as the MPD would explain that they didn't believe this was a missing person case, as Joniah had clearly chosen to leave on her own accord, and therefore, they were not willing to label her as critically missing, which would have more than likely unlocked extra resources and some much needed media coverage. They also refused to track Joniah's cell phone, as they claimed that they needed a warrant to do such a thing, but after explaining that her father had purchased the cell phone himself and therefore would happily provide the necessary permission for them to track it, the Milwaukee PD eventually caved and agreed to search the records. It was then discovered that Joniah had last used her cell phone to call her therapist the previous day, but that she had powered her phone down shortly after, so there was unfortunately nothing more they could do. Well, this information understandably worried Tanisha and the rest of Joniah's family, as this implied that she may have been struggling with her mental health around the time of her disappearance. And so, with these implications, the family hoped that the Milwaukee PD would finally upgrade her case to critically missing, especially given her past abuse and subsequent struggles with depression. However, just as before, the police refused to act for reasons unknown, leaving Tanisha bewildered by their attitude and frustrated that they were unable to help her find her vulnerable missing daughter. But despite their lack of assistance, Tanisha and the rest of the family would continue to search for Joniah, and it wouldn't be too much longer before they uncovered a new piece of evidence, which would take this already suspicious case to a whole new level. On Monday the 27th of June, Tanisha Howard was continuing to grow incredibly worried about her teenage daughter, as she had now been missing for over 4 days, having absolutely no contact with her family throughout this time. So, desperate for answers, Tanisha once again attempted to lean on the Milwaukee PD, as she had already exhausted every resource she could in finding her daughter and was therefore left with very few other options. But to her surprise, this time around the police were much more receptive to her pleas for help, and agreed to send officers out to the apartment to speak to Tanisha directly, as opposed to just over the phone. However, despite making the trip out to visit Tanisha in person, it would seem that they would not be very interested in sticking around for long, as after just a few minutes of speaking outside the apartment, they suddenly decided to leave without searching the premises or even taking any evidence away with them. According to Tanisha, it was as if they were only showing up to say that they had made the effort, but didn't ever have any real intent to take the case seriously. So after being left frustrated once again by the lack of action displayed by the Milwaukee PD, Tanisha decided to try contacting the FBI to ask for their assistance, as up until now her local police department were useless to say the least. And to her astonishment, they immediately agreed to look into the case with the understanding that Joniah could have been in serious danger given the details surrounding her disappearance. The FBI then started their investigation by looking into the suspicious Amazon delivery that Joniah had talked about in the previous week, but upon gaining access to her account, they were troubled to see that the teenager had not made any purchases, and that the large delivery box that arrived that day must have been sent by somebody else. It was then established after looking through Joniah's iPad that she had actually been deleting some messages in the days leading up to her disappearance, which implied that she was meeting somebody that day and that this suspect could have been the very same person that purchased the Amazon delivery containing the large rucksack she was seen wearing in the surveillance footage. So with this new harrowing piece of information, the FBI then tried to contact the delivery service to see if they could find out who the sender was, but despite their efforts, it would seem that this attempt to trace the delivery would be futile, as according to Tanisha, she would never receive an update from the detectives. So, as the days went by, her hope of seeing Joniah again was starting to dwindle, as it had now been weeks since her disappearance, and therefore, the chances of her daughter's return were growing weaker with each passing day. But just as the case began to grow cold, Tanisha would receive an email that could potentially change everything. On Wednesday the 17th of August, around 2 months after Joniah's disappearance, her mother Tanisha would receive a strange email from a person that was claiming to be Joniah, which explained how she was apparently safe but didn't want to be found. According to Tanisha, the person writing the email even included details which only Joniah would ever know, leading her to believe that this could have actually been her daughter. However, after taking the email over to the Milwaukee Police Department, she was told that they would not be able to trace the IP of the device that sent the email, and they weren't even interested in noting down the email address itself as potential evidence. So once again, frustrated by the lack of assistance from the police, Tanisha was then forced to call up the FBI to see if they would be willing to look into the suspicious email, but to her astonishment, she would not get a reply, and after searching up the email address herself a few days later, it was discovered that it had since been deleted, meaning there was now no way to trace the owner of the email address. So, despite the massive efforts of a heartbroken mother that had given everything to find her daughter, it would appear that almost 2 years on from the day she disappeared, Joniah Walker still remains a missing person to this day. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But given the recent disappearance and subsequent murder of Sade Robinson, it would appear that Joniah's case has been given a new lease of life, as not only did both girls go missing in the city of Milwaukee, but they both worked for the very same pizza restaurant and disappeared under similar circumstances. However, if you are familiar with Sade's story, then you will already know that if these two cases are connected, then the likelihood of Joniah's safe return would be difficult to conceive. But saying this, with the teenager still being officially listed as missing almost 2 years on from her disappearance, there is still every possibility that Joniah Walker could be alive out there somewhere. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, to kick things off, as I normally do on this channel, I would prefer to start by looking at some of the more positive theories surrounding this case, as until we have concrete evidence that Joniah is no longer with us, I think it would be worth discussing the ways in which she could still be out there. So, is it really possible that Joniah Walker could have simply ran away from home that day, just as the suspicious email stipulated? Well, before we get too hung up on the details of that email, it must be said that just because the email itself claimed to be written by Joniah doesn't mean that this is true. In all honesty, the email could have easily been written by anybody, a local neighbour, a family member who wanted to keep the case alive, or even a potential suspect who had Joniah held hostage at the time. But let's say, for argument's sake, that the email was actually sent by Joniah, and that she really did decide to start a new life somewhere. Surely there had to be somebody with her at the time. We know from the deleted files on her iPad that she was certainly talking to somebody around the time of her disappearance, and given the fact that her rucksack was purchased by an unknown person, this would surely imply that she left with the intention of meeting someone. At this point in the investigation, it has not been revealed if this was a platonic friend or a potential romantic interest, but given the prevalence of online dating in today's society, I wouldn't be surprised if Joniah was planning to meet up with somebody she had met on the internet. Now, I should just clarify that this is nothing more than a theory, but given the lack of police investigation, I feel it would still be useful to ponder this idea for a little while longer, as if Joniah had been meeting up with a stranger from the internet, this could certainly explain why she has not been seen since. Perhaps this could also be the very same person that has been keeping her hidden away for all of this time, and she may not even feel like she's a prisoner. I know this might sound far-fetched, but given her traumatic past and struggles with mental health, it could be possible that Joniah would be impressionable enough to just stay with somebody as long as they made her feel safe. There have been cases where missing young women have decided to move in with their older boyfriends, such as the story of Natasha Ryan, who was a 14-year-old Australian girl that went missing back in 1998, only to be discovered 5 years later at her boyfriend's house. But the real twist to this story was that after being found, she decided to stay with her boyfriend, eventually marrying him and starting a family. So based on this example, I think it would be safe to say that these things really do happen. But before I get too carried away, I am aware that the likelihood of this being the case is very slim in comparison to other theories, especially given the extremely similar details between Joniah's case and the tragic murder of Sade Robinson in recent weeks. So with this in mind, it is unfortunately time to move on to the next theory. Now, just before I get into it, if you're not familiar with Sade's case, then I highly recommend checking out the video on screen now, as I go into a lot more detail and I'm sure you will be able to identify even more similarities in their cases that I haven't mentioned here. But just for the sake of context, I will quickly provide a brief rundown of her story. So, on Monday the 1st of April, just a few weeks ago, a 19-year-old college student named Sade Robinson was spotted walking along North Commerce Street in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as she had secretly planned to meet an older man for a date. It is unknown how the two first crossed paths, whether that be through online dating or simply meeting in person somewhere, but either way, she was reported missing later that day by her family after she failed to show up for her scheduled shift at the Pizza Shuttle restaurant. The next morning, Sade's car was found on fire in an alleyway, approximately 2 miles from where she was last seen, and then later that same day, a severed human leg was discovered at Warnemont Park by Lake Michigan. The case was then escalated to a possible homicide, and potential suspects were immediately brought in for questioning, including a local man named Maxwell Anderson, after blood was discovered on the stairwell of his home, and it was reported that he may have had contact with Sade in the days building up to her disappearance. And soon after, it was revealed that the blood did in fact belong to Sade, as well as the body parts that had been found scattered all around the city. So with this heartbreaking update in the case, Maxwell is now being held on a $500,000 bail and will be standing before a judge next week for his preliminary hearing to decide if he will be convicted for the crime. Now, it should be said that this murder case is still in its very early stages, so I'm sure there will be a lot more information to come out in the following weeks surrounding Maxwell Anderson and his other potential crimes. But one detail which sticks out to me is the rumour that he may have possessed some kind of torture chamber in his home that very well could have been used in previous crimes. I should say that this is yet to be verified, so please don't take this information as complete truth, at least not until more details are released. But given his supposed crime against Sade, I certainly wouldn't dispute the fact that this could have been something he did before with other potential victims, such as Joniah. It would certainly explain why she hasn't been seen in almost 2 years since her disappearance. After all, Sade and Joniah are of similar complexions and appearance. Both girls were working at Pizza Shuttle at the time of their disappearances and had planned to meet unknown people on those days. Plus, they were also both living within a short distance to where Maxwell lived in Milwaukee. So, if you add all these details together, as well as acknowledging the fact that Maxwell was also a well-known criminal in the area, who had been convicted of several brutal crimes throughout his life, I think there is certainly an argument to be made that his fatal actions towards Sade could have been replicated with multiple other women in recent years. However, for the sake of Joniah's family, I must say I truly hope that this isn't the case, and that they can one day be reunited with their missing loved one. So please, share this story with as many people as you can, and show your support to the family, as after almost 2 years of waiting for answers, I think we can all agree that they deserve some closure, regardless of the conclusion. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own that you think may help explain what really happened to Joniah Walker, please leave your comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about the Sade Robinson case, as well as a more in-depth analysis of Maxwell Anderson, feel free to check out the video on screen now.